Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Southeast Linux Fest, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this evening. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
What a blast.
I don't know if I've ever said that next to you, have I? I mean, I know
no, I don't think so.
Together,
not usually. You don't do the official like deep voice announcement when you're sitting right beside me.
Right. So it's a special episode, Steve. We're at Southeast Linux Fest. Are you having fun?
I'm having a great time, actually. I'm not sure about the people who came and listened to me. I think I put them to sleep. Maybe it was the nap time. I'm not sure.
So I disagree. I think that it's so you gave 3 talks this year. You gave in my humble opinion, the best one was the alerting. The second best one was the observability, and then thirdly followed by the virtualization and containers. And I say that order only because of its usefulness to me, which should be the metric of how everybody evaluates how useful it is to me. But yeah, I learned a ton. I took a number of notes, so I'm going back and I'm going to walk in, give a presentation to my team, and act like I know something about alerts and observability now.
Well, I'm glad you learned something, and the whole purpose is just to give you stepping stones as opposed to talking about specific tooling, right? The idea is I don't want to discourage people from using the tooling that they're using, or even giving them a sense they're doing something wrong. But hey, here's some stuff that you might consider if your tooling allows you to do it.
It was interesting because at least 1 or 2 people kind of I don't know what missed that part of the presentation, I guess, as it were, and we're like, well, but I like this thing or that thing, and I think you very much directly said, you're like, well, I didn't tell you. I didn't even mention tooling. I just said practices. You can apply those practices anywhere, which I kind of appreciate because it allows me, even if I'm not using a specific tool, or even if somebody hasn't yet. I saw DeLuca digging through. He's like, wow, what am I going to set up for logging? Well, you don't have to have logging set up. You don't have to have alerting in place in order to take advantage of that presentation, to understand the concepts that'll make you successful when you do it.
And that's really the hope. Like Red Hat very graciously, and I do mean that, very graciously pays for me to come out to some of these things. And so I try to do justice, but at the same time, I want you to use Red Hat projects if it's the thing that will suit you, right? I don't want, just like when we evangelize Linux, I don't want to shoehorn something in and then have people grumble about the thing because they were convinced instead of actually wanting the thing.
Yeah, it's not valuable to them. So tonight's a special episode. We are going to do an Ask Me Anything. That means you can ask us technical questions. We know about technical questions, but you can ask us about anything else. Up first, if I can figure out where my button is here. It's Patrick from New Springs Church. Welcome in. First of all, how are you liking Southeast Linux Fest?
Oh, it's always great, Noah. I've been having a great time. I really think you're right. The hallway track is some of the best part, though, is just the people you meet here.
Yeah, 100%. So you had a question for us.
Yeah, I was looking that up right now. Can you flash? I've got a bunch of these Casa smart plugs that I use for all over the place, and I know that there's different kind of smart plugs people use, and there's people who flash them with different firmware so that all that data is not being sent off site. I'd like everything to stay local. Do you guys know anything about if not the Casa smart plugs, what would a feller want to use if he was just getting into home automation and wanting to control it all with on-site, on-premise? How would you go about that?
Okay, so you're looking at home automation and you're looking for smart plugs. What's your go-to? What are you reaching the bag for?
Well, so first we'll talk about the Casa because you said you had them. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, no one has been able to crack that because we don't really know what's inside of it. A lot of times, even when you open up these plugs, they deliberately obfuscate which chipsets they're using. And even if you can determine the chipset, sometimes they remove the headers so you can't flash to them. And people haven't put a ton of effort into trying to figure out how to man in the middle, if that's possible. So one of the ways that was done in the past was you could set up something on your laptop that would pretend to be the update server for some of these smart plugs, and it would just intercept the request, and then you could push whatever firmware you wanted. However, those avenues have been being closed down. So in lieu of something like that, there are a couple of questions that I have. First is, can you or do you want to put them in the wall, so replace the outlet itself, or do you just want to have the little power brick to kind of port around?
Well, I'm actually using this at my church, and it's a rather large church, and we're using it for all sorts of different things. So it's great when it's just a plug in the device into the wall, especially if it ever goes bad. It'd be nice to be able to quickly replace it. But we're actually doing our outside lighting at night, for the parking lot lights. It's just a contactor plugged into a smart plug. And we've got a lot of the environments for the kids, instead of having somebody walk by and flip switches on the wall to turn all the things on, we've just got smart plugs installed in various locations. So we've got great internet coverage. So I'd like to have something that isn't getting into the Zigbee/Z-Wave area. I'd like it to be 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, so that I could control it kind of like we are now. But I just want it to be rock solid, and I don't want it to change on me.
So
I heard 2.4 gigahertz and rock solid in the same sentence.
No. So Wi-Fi is always going to, not always. That's not fair. Wi-Fi can be flaky and susceptible to interference, right?
Yeah.
So 2.4 gigahertz will go through a bunch of walls because it's a lower spectrum, right? So the lower you go on the spectrum, the easier it is to traverse through areas.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I was saying is, I've heard a lot of people complain about the Z-Wave or Zigbee, having issues with it being too far away and not connecting to things. I've got good Wi-Fi coverage. That's why, I've got plenty of access points that I've not had a lot of issues with connections to that.
Sure.
So far.
So there's two things that I would say. First of all, the outside one should be IP rated, so like IP67 or something like that. I don't have a good answer for that on the Wi-Fi because, to my knowledge, all of the resellers that sell an open source firmware don't have an outside version, which means you would be finding one and flashing it and then roll the dice. Maybe it works fine, maybe it doesn't.
All of them are inside. They're just running contactors to run the outside lights.
Okay. So in that case, I have a friend over at cloudfree.shop, and he has plugs that I buy. There's another guy on Amazon if you want. So cloudfree.shop does Tasmota.
Okay.
The other one, there's a gentleman that is related to the Home Assistant community, and he sells Kauf plugs, Kauf, and they come with ESP Home, and I have a couple of those as well, and they're both the same sort of like you plug them in or whatever. And so actually, the one that is downstairs that we were using to troubleshoot, that's a Kauf plug.
The Ask GPT plug?
Yep.
That's burned into my mind.
And if we were going to choose a way for controlling it, what would you use if you were we're in a church setting? So I'm going to have lots of different people needing to turn on a kid's environment during the week without having to interface with me. Would you use Home Assistant? Would you use something other than Home Assistant? Would you?
So what do the normies use to interact with the smart plugs?
I guess that would depend on what kind of interface you can give them, because you wouldn't use an ESP Home for the normies because that requires something else. It doesn't have a good web page for it. Whereas Tasmota, you could, in theory, have just a page of links, which is what we did for a long time at my house, because Tasmota just has a big red button that says like on, off, or whatever.
Okay.
Right, where you can go directly to the web page of the thing.
Okay.
Right, so there's a couple of ways.
But would you use Home Assistant to kind of gather that all in, or do you think
you could? It really depends. So one of the things that has been effective is if you have like a landing page for the room, you put a QR code up on the room, people scan the QR code and go to the web page for the room. And so this could
clever.
This could include just things like embedding the Tasmota on-off button, or you could use Home Assistant. There's also OpenHab. There's a bunch of ways you could do this, right? And so it would depend, because Home Assistant gets a little bit challenging from the perspective of like, how do I make sure that this person is in the right room and they didn't turn off the wrong thing, while still giving people like, so I'm teacher A and I happen to think I'm in the classroom right beside me. Maybe next week I am, so you don't want to restrict that via permissions, right?
And really, maybe just physical switches in the world that they could hit that would turn it on for 2 hours if it was not during the normal schedule would be a
so that
way.
you can do with Home Assistant. So this is what I do with the outside plug. So I have a solenoid pump. For people that don't know, this basically is a physical pump that's controlled by DC voltage, and I use that to water the lawn. And so what I do is either from Home Assistant or from the device, you turn it on, and as soon as Home Assistant catches the fact that the on signal was sent, regardless of how it was, it starts a timer and then turns it off and sends you notification saying the sprinkler ran.
Okay.
So you can do that using your automation, just catch that on event and then start a timer, for example.
And that would be through Home Assistant?
That's what I used it for. Yep.
It seems to me there'd be an advantage of Home Assistant because there could be multiple. So the web page, there's one way to do it. You go to the web page, you turn it on, turn it off. With Home Assistant, you could have a real world button that you push and it triggers it. Could also do it from automation. You could also give people access to the app and give them credentials and say, hey, you can log in. When you're in the Children's Center, you click on Children's Center. When you're in the foyer, you click on foyer. And that may be a permission thing. You'll say, hey, these lights I don't want anybody monkeying with, but these, all the classrooms and, this, that I'll let people do.
So you could still do what you're talking about through Tasmota. So Tasmota has rules that it can store, and they are meant for exactly that sort of thing. I got this event, do this thing, then do this, right?
Okay.
So it's there. You can only hold 3 rules per Tasmota because they don't have a lot of storage on them. So that's your limitation. But I'm just saying,
It's possible.
it is a possibility.
One of the things I do like about the Casa Smart Plug is that it will know where it's at in the world and turn on at dark and turn off when the sun comes back up. Is that something fairly easy to? Because that's one of the main functions.
Yep. I do that with my outside porch lights. They come on at. Sometimes it's a little bit off because it gets darker earlier than you expect, but it goes based on the official sunrise sunset, and the lights go on and then they come off at dawn.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Your thoughts, your questions are entertained. It's at 855-450. No, it's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com, or join us in the Geek Lab at geeklab.ninja. Sleuth in the chat room says, Shelly, not a dedicated IoT VLAN with no internet. What do you think about using a Shelly?
I mean, I'm a big fan of the Shelly. I haven't noticed any problem with them needing to connect home. I like the firmware quite a bit, actually. I have no problem with them.
So that might be an option as well. Again, your questions, if you have them, you can grab the mic, ask them. I think those guys took off over there. But you're welcome to do so. I have a question for you, Steve. If not for technology, the world comes to a catastrophic and all the technology is gone, what was the first thing that you would be reaching for creature comfort, entertainment, fun, something to do? Would it be a laptop? Would it be a computer? Would it be some sort of piece of technology, or would it be something else?
I'd be reaching for food, firstly.
Okay, well, let's say for the sake of argument. So you have the first 6 months, you find yourself some shelter, you get a water plan established, you got some food. I mean, for me, I would, right? I'd be going for, okay, I got my 12-volt battery, so now what can I power with my 12-volt battery? Oh, I could probably power this computer and this little 5-inch screen. There, now he's back. I would be doing that. I would be reaching for those things, and I feel like I would try to find some sort of semblance of, I want to get some sort of technical thing running. And if I had some local video files, I'd be playing them as a form of entertainment. I'm curious, do you relate to that at all? Or you say, that's so far up the luxury scale that if I was down back on ground level, I'd be looking for something else.
Yeah, I'd grab my bow.
Okay.
That's what I would be doing. I'd either be perfecting bow hunting, or I just enjoy shooting my bow. So that's probably what I would do. It's easy. It's low tech. It's a practical skill that you can apply if you needed it.
We kind of had this conversation once off air. I'd be interested. You obviously work at a very high level with some of the technical things. And yet, interestingly, you're not that married to them, and I don't mean that in pejorative way. I mean that in the way of, if they went away tomorrow, it really wouldn't affect your life. You wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I'm going to overemphasize this, and so listeners should take it with a grain of salt. But it's almost like it's a fancy toy for people that want fancy toys.
Yeah, I came to this realization probably about 15 years ago when someone asked, if you were to lose, like, what is the one thing you wouldn't want to lose, right? And I was thinking about that, and I thought, mobility. If I lost my mobility, that would kill me, right? And so from that, I've kind of framed around like, well, what's important to me is like I run, so I like to be outside. I do a lot of manual labor outside. Even I enjoy it, right? I like to have my podcasts to listen to and my audiobooks.
Yeah.
But I would say of all the technology, that's the thing I would be tied to the most. And I mean, that's so far down the list, trying to power a phone and get like, your audiobook onto the phone at the end of the world. Like I'm probably doing something else.
All right. Chris has a question. So you guys set up Nextcloud. You set up Nextcloud and you installed a collaborative editing suite called OnlyOffice.
OnlyOffice.
Now you're having a weird issue. Can you describe what that issue is?
Well, so when we're trying to use it to collaborate, particularly we're using the spreadsheet, and typically in collaboration software, you can see where someone else's cursor is. And of course, in a spreadsheet, you see the box that they're in. You can see them moving around. Typically, you see someone type as they type. Now, in a spreadsheet, you would see the data entered after they hit enter, and they put it in the cell. We don't see anything. I'll see whoever else is on the spreadsheet with me moving around. They type something, and typically we're doing this on the phone. And well, do you see it? No, I don't see it. I'll refresh the web page, and there the data will be, and it goes both directions.
Interesting. Steve, have you ever seen anything? Well, first of all, let me start here. Do you use OnlyOffice in the collaborative editing part of it in Nextcloud, or not so much?
No, I don't. I use the regular Markdown sharing. So like that I use all the time, whatever comes right with Nextcloud. So the Nextcloud note, it's not notes, but like the whatever it's called when you share a document, it drops you into the Markdown stuff.
I think it's called Nextdown Documents, isn't it?
Could be. I don't remember. I just generate a share link and send it to people.
The only problem with that is when you install something like OnlyOffice, it disappears, and you get the OnlyOffice document editor. And so it could be possible that it's there, and we haven't found the right switch to turn it back on. But the OnlyOffice website says, this is how it works, and it's supposed to work great. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, did it ever work in the beginning?
I don't think so.
Okay, so no, it never worked. So, and typically what we're doing is we're working on a quote for a client, and so we're taking notes where we found a piece of hardware we want to buy, and or we want 2 or 3 to go look at. So we'll save links to where we found them and prices on what it was, and that's how we use it to collaborate.
Does that work outside of the spreadsheet? Like if you use like the document portion of that?
I don't think any of them work. No, none of them.
Interesting.
That's a strange thing. I tell you what, I don't have any direct experience myself. However, I do have a client that's using OnlyOffice in a Nextcloud suite. Interestingly enough, he is a listener of this show. So I have reached out to him and I've said, hey, I know you're using this for collaborative document editing. Can you tell me anything about the spreadsheets? Now, I will tell you that I don't know that he necessarily uses the spreadsheets, and I also believe that the way that he does collaborative document editing is I think it's one guy that is going out there doing it, and then other people are, viewing it or looking at it afterwards. I don't know that it's so much like both people are editing it at the same time. I'm not sure if that plays into it. So far as I understand it, you guys were able to track down an error message, so maybe that will lead to some sort of an identification as to what the root cause is.
Well, my better half's working on it, so we'll see where that leads.
We'll check that out. I appreciate the question. In the Geek Lab, Sleuth says, or I'm sorry, 2-Bit says, is there any new technology that you're looking forward to?
Well, what about you? I'll punt this at you first.
Okay. So I would say, I think, so yes, there is. Interestingly enough, it's not so much IT related, although it kind of is. Radio stations are moving into the cloud. And that's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Back in the 90s, they started to automate radio stations. So it went from somebody sitting in front of a microphone and you could pick up that phone and you knew somebody was going to answer the phone, right? And so whether it was you wanted to know what the weather was, or you wanted to hear your favorite song, or you wanted to know if a bridge was closed or there was road traffic, or whatever it was, you could pick up the phone and somebody answered. And the day that changed, whatever day that was kind of a sad day because it put an end to the live nature of radio, as it were, and started to move into this more automated space. Easy for me to say. So now, some of the large radio players are moving into the next version of radio, which is radio in the cloud. And the way they're doing it is really interesting. They have these boxes that sit at the transmitter site that feed it audio, and they sync up with boxes that are sitting inside of the cloud. And so on a normal day, you make the change in the cloud, and that change just syncs down to the box. And this is all being done with containers. Syncs down to that box on the edge, and then plays the audio out. Should that ever become disconnected from the internet, the box that's connected, that's playing off the audio, knows what the next 7 days of programming look like, so it just continues to play. Now, obviously, you're not going to do anything live that way, but at least the radio station doesn't go off the air. Additionally, what it means is you could be sitting in a studio in Tallahassee, and your radio station goes out, or there's a problem with your studio, so you can't do that. So you give a call to a guy in New York and say, hey, I'm sitting in Tallahassee and I can't get on the air. The guy in New York says, no problem. And he walks into a studio, pushes a button, and they are taking a WebRTC session from a laptop. They're streaming that up into this cloud instance. That pulls the audio then from the talent. That cloud instance mixes it all together, sends it back down to the edge device that is then playing it back out. So you can be on any station, anywhere in the country with laptop and USB interface, which is kind of crazy, and it kind of blows my mind. And I guess I'm excited. I'm scared by it because I feel like there is a chance that one other industry kind of goes by the wayside. However, I think even if it does, it will give way to the new industry of streaming and podcasters, to where now your laptop and you have access to the same technology and the same methodology that the big boys are using. I also think it's going to drive some of those big players. I was talking to somebody who works in the industry who I ran into here at the conference, and I said, these companies, they manufacture these boards. They're $20,000, $30,000 for these soundboards. Do you think they're threatened by this? And he goes, not at all. In fact, if anything, I think they're going to start to pivot to make less expensive and start competing inside of that space of, we don't need these fancy, super complex audio routing things. We need to be able to get voice into a computer and out onto the internet, because that's really kind of going to be the future of broadcast. And so that's what really excites me. I get really happy thinking about what that means for people. The fact that people will have their voice, they're going to be able to do it, and it won't be less than. It won't be second class. It'll be the same thing the big boys are using, or big girls, or bigots, whatever.
I don't think you meant bigots.
Yeah, bigots.
No,
if you're not big,
I think you mean big its, not bigot.
I wasn't assuming.
It may come out of left field for you, but I'm really excited about the stuff that SpaceX is doing.
Oh, really?
Well,
yes.
It appeals to that ongoing conversation we've had about how I think that we need to do our best to minimize the amount that we're throwing away. And the SpaceX's whole reason for being is basically reusable rocketry and space exploration. So I'm not a big space person, especially not I don't go listen to any of the podcasts or whatever, but I watch the SpaceX launches and I follow that on X or Twitter or whatever that is.
Today, yeah. X, formerly Twitter.
And I think the idea of colonizing other areas is very interesting to me. And as it becomes closer, as I watch rockets landing or new technology in that space being used, the thought of sending a rocket and then actually being able to decompose the rocket and turn it into something useful and actually have a colony somewhere, that is really interesting. And it's tied in with this idea. So, little tangent for you.
Okay.
So I'm trying to improve upon my German, right? And so one of the things I talked with my teacher about is I'm looking for something to do that.
Yes.
So what I've been doing is consuming media and then writing a summary and then teaching her about the subject, right?
Now, did you come up with this idea, or did she come up with this idea?
It was a combination of things. We were looking together. But anyways, I came across this video and it was talking about the future of the human race, and it kind of devolved into the video split into two, where one was, here's what would happen if we stayed on the Earth and some of the possibilities there, and here's what would happen if we became interplanetary. And when I started thinking about the interplanetary, the ability to have more humans and not less actually expands your ability to solve complex problems. And so the things that we think are problems now probably with enough brain power become less of a problem. And I think despite the, let's say, the abundance of lack of common sense, there seems to be a lot of that. Despite that, I think we would be we would benefit more from having more humans. And so interplanetary allows you to expand that, put more brains towards things, and like the more you have people thinking about interesting problems, the more chance that there is we'll actually find a solution for that.
How would you feel if Harbor Freight came out with a rocket?
I feel like I wouldn't ride on it.
What if it's a one-use rocket?
Yes, and then you're gambling that, is this the one that's 0.75 use rocket? Like, does this fall apart before I get the job done?
I've never had, well, actually though. Okay, DeLuca.
Yeah. Am I on? I have a question segueing back to, you asked the apocalypse question.
Yeah.
And none of us obviously expected Steve's answer. Well, I didn't expect, we all know what kind of a technical guy Steve is. And
Well, maybe just because I have more off the air conversation. I kind of expected that.
To your point, we had an off the air conversation. We were eating lunch, and he brought up the fact that he has a bow, and I was like, "Oh, really? Compound, longbow?" And he says, "Oh, longbow." And Steve, have you heard of an atlatl?
An atlatl.
An atlatl.
I have not.
I believe it was an Aboriginal weapon. So basically, what you have is, you ever see one of those things that you put a tennis ball in and you could throw real far for your dog?
Mm-hmm.
Think of that, but with an arrow. So what you have is you have a very long stick. Well, it's about half as long as the arrow, and you're shooting an arrow that is, I don't know, 3 feet long, and it's sitting in a hook in the end of the thing, of the stick, and so you're holding it, and you do that and throw it, and it will. They're very accurate. You might want to look into that.
That's really neat.
It's
I
called
like
an
that.
atlatl. I believe it's
Atlatl.
Aborigines. It comes from Aborigines.
I'd have to see how hard that is to make. Just
They
out
are
of
not
curiosity.
hard to make. It's just a couple of sticks, and you got to put fletching on it, obviously, and sharpen the end. But I figured you would get a kick
Yeah,
out of
no, that appeals to me. Like the idea, the reason why it's the bow and not a gun or crossbow is because the bow is something that you can make and repair in emergency.
Oh, hey,
To your point.
hey, now. Apparently, you have not heard of the FGC-9. Sorry, continue.
No, that's just a bunch of letters.
To your point, and this is what got me thinking of it, is Noah posed the question, the apocalypse. Well, how hard is it going to be to get sinew or string or whatever if your bow gets cut and to restring it? There's nothing to restring with an atlatl because it's just 2 sticks.
Yeah,
You
no,
just
that's
go
really
cut
neat.
you a branch off a tree, hook you a notch in the end, and you're back to throwing.
Yeah, I like that.
Look it up.
He even says it like a hillbilly. I love it. Get you a bow and get you.
Get you a bow and a
So-
string and. Sorry.
You got. So, the FGC-9. So this is a real thing. So, the FGC-9 was created in countries that are highly oppressed and don't have access to guns, and so the design is basically the ability to build a gun based off of 3D printed parts or things that you can buy at a hardware store, right? So it starts in like Russia and Germany and kind of takes off, right? Like wildfire. And so all these places that aren't supposed to have guns all of a sudden have guns. But then there's people in the United States that are like, hold on a second. We got freedom. We don't have to. And so now they make these kits. And so you can.
Oh, I heard about the kits.
Yeah, and so you can print off the receiver, and you can go buy like the barrel and the thing and the magazine and all, and just assemble the whole dang thing and put it together. It's fantastic. The thing that I think is, if you may not be able to find string and all that, but I have enough PLA to last me a lifetime. So in the apocalypse, all I got to do is power the Ender 3, and I'm
yeah,
set.
I was going to say, where are you going to get the power for that? I mean, you're going to be sacrificing a long time.
I feel like.
And then where are you going to get your bullets from?
You're going to find an old car, and you're going to pull the alternate out of it. You're going to hook it to the back wheel of a bicycle, and then you're going to pedal your bicycle, and you're going to.
I mean, I might pay to see that.
So this is a true story. It's completely off topic. No, it's not, because it's asked me everything. So I was in physical. This is a true story. I'm in physical therapy, okay, and they have me on this bike, And the bike has you. I had herniated a disc in my neck, and so a part of that is they're trying to build my upper body strength, right? So they give me this thing that's basically like two handles, and you like pedal it's like pedaling a bike except with your hand. Well, I'm ADD to the max. Okay, so that lasts about 11 seconds, and I'm like, I'm done with this. Is not. And she's like, well, you gotta go for whatever it was, 6 minutes or something. I'm like, good lord. So I start looking for things to do, and I realize there's a screen and a configuration on this bike thing. So I didn't ask. I just started playing with it, and I push the button, and I find out you can turn it into watt mode, so you can see how many watts you're generating. I'm like, okay, now we're onto something. Okay. What am I generating? 30 watts. Well, that's nothing. All right, I need to power my laptop. 65 watts. So I start getting it up there, and I'm like, okay, all right, 65 watts. Now, if it was the Alienware, I need 90. Can I get to 90? Ooh, that's hard. Okay, how long can I keep 90 watts going? And, like, it was a real lesson for me about, like, how much work does it take to generate power?
So, so first of all, your therapy session turned into a workout session, obviously.
Something like that.
Ironically, did it get harder as you were generating more watts?
The way I would describe it is it's hard to get to that point, but then but to maintain it wasn't as hard once you got there, and then you would hit a point where it would felt like it was like slowing down, and then I have to work to get myself back up. So it's kind of like this: I get to 100, and then I slow back down until I drop down to 9 and get to 100.
But I guess my
sense?
question is, was it physically harder, or was it maintaining the speed? Because if you were generating 90 watts and you were using it, the device that is using that wattage is going to push back on the generator, and it's going to make it harder to power.
Oh no!
Yeah, that's
So
Back EMF?
Yeah.
I can't have that.
So
that was hard enough just to get there.
There was I forget where I saw it, read it. A guy took his whole family off grid, and they had to power their own electricity. And his kids were like, well, we want to watch TV. He says, well, you're going to get an hour of TV a day, but you're going to generate the power to watch the TV. Well, how are we going to do that? So he created the scenario I just said. He created a bicycle that powers the TV.
Okay.
So he gets the children, whatever the child is that wants to watch TV, they start pedaling. But, oh, this isn't bad. He turns the TV on. Well, now it's pulling power. The generator has to work. The kid had a hard time pedaling because when you pull that current, the generator fights back.
I got it.
And so so he's showing
You
his
need a
kids,
battery in between the generator and the TV.
that would work. But he's showing his kids, look, this is what using this TV is going to cost you. You want to watch it, you're going to generate the energy to do it. But
if kids in Africa can pedal bikes to use their Raspberry Pis, I can pedal a bike to
okay,
watch
but a
TV.
Raspberry Pi uses milliwatts.
I want 90. I want my alien.
You want 90 watts. Well, you're going to have big legs, big muscular
Well, this
legs.
was arms, but yeah, no, I get it.
But
I mean, you might have just solved or partially solved the parenting dilemma that I have with technology and
there
children.
you go. Absolutely.
Right.
Oh, that could be clever.
Like-
And you're crazy
You
enough
must
to do
charge-
it.
Yeah,
You
I
must charge
absolutely would
the
do it. I absolutely would do it.
You must charge the laptop with the generator
Yes.
in order to use it.
Yep. And then
You
I
get one
rely on the
battery a day.
laziness of children to just walk away and get bored.
Yeah, and they probably would. All right. You have a question. Go ahead.
I do. So I'm wondering, speaking of like new technologies emerging,
Yeah.
have you seen the same trend that I have in analog phone systems? I am coming across fairly large providers, AT&T and Verizon, for example, are going to some of the customers that they've had for years on landlines and saying, I'm sorry, we're not doing that anymore. You have to move from your landline to a VoIP line.
You have to move from your analog to a VoIP line.
100%, yes.
Where are you seeing that?
In Ohio, and also in Pennsylvania.
So here's the thing. I've seen the opposite actually. So there's small rural providers are granted exceptions from the porting rules, right? So you're a business, you want to take your phone number with you, so you sign up for a VoIP line. I'm going to use all this fancy VoIP technology, plug my phone in, work from anywhere. Yay! I'm going to be at a beach in Florida. You get to the beach in Florida, you plug your phone in, you're like, hey, I want my phone number. The rural provider says, no. We get an exemption because if we don't get an exemption, you'll bleed us dry. And the federal government granted those exemptions. So it's interesting. You're kind of talking about the opposite, where they're forcing them to go to VoIP. What's the advantage of going to VoIP? Like, why would we want to force that?
I think in the cases that I've come across, it's been rural areas that have had these landlines, and I don't think they want to maintain them anymore, but they are providing some sort of internet to that area through, in AT&T's case, it's going to be DSL, right? And so I think that that is their motivation, but I'm not sure. I'm speculating.
Interesting. So I'll tell you this. When we had analog phone lines, we had a tariff on that line. So if there wasn't a dial tone when you picked up the phone, you got a fine from the federal government, right? For every second that line was off, you got fined from the federal government. And so there was tremendous incentive to make sure that every darn time you pick up the phone, there's a dial tone and it's ready to take your call, baby. No such thing exists. If you go look at your ISP, it says best effort. It's kind of like, well, we'll try to get you internet, and then if we don't, we'll try to get you internet. And that's really the best you get. I don't know that we ever really had a conversation about, so are we ready to give up and abandon this very reliable piece of technology? And don't get me wrong, faster, more flexible, all the things that we love about VoIP. Absolutely, all day long and twice on Sunday, right? But as far as a reliability standpoint, if you want to get your voice from point A to point B, copper line is still a really good way to go. So I guess I'm really bothered by what you're telling me. It seems like there's a potential real downside in there, isn't there?
I can see that. I mean, in my case, it helps me, right? Like, I am trying to persuade the business to go with a VoIP solution so that I can sell them one.
Sure.
And so I'm not upset because it's very easy to compete with these larger companies who can't offer some of the same solutions I can, such as, call recording and things like that. But I definitely see your point, and that's why I was kind of curious, because it also took me back that I'm thinking from the emergency line perspective, right? If the internet goes out and the cell towers aren't available for the VoIP system, then the people in that organization can't call out for help.
Yeah.
And so you would think that they would be pushing the other way, right? Like, hey,
Right.
we want copper lines in there so that the reliability is there for an emergency service.
Mm.
So in Canada, they are sunsetting the copper networks. So we really only have one provider. You can split hairs, but Bell Canada is the government-backed monopoly up there, and they are replacing their copper lines. So I understood that their deadline was 2025, although I'm not sure whether that's a government mandate or whether that's them just saying, like, we're rolling this out and that's our deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that in Canada for sure. They're replacing it with fiber, and I think that's fiber to the termination, not fiber direct to the house, right?
Gotcha.
And they're still running copper from there, but we're seeing that transition. But there isn't a lot of people that are still using landlines in Canada, even with the rural population.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that from a residential perspective for sure, but I was thinking more of the business perspective because, hotels and places that have elevators, they absolutely currently have that phone that dials out.
Right,
So-
right. Yeah, I don't know how. I hadn't considered the elevator's a good example. I'm not sure how that's going to be impacted. Like, Bell just basically started in 2020, like right before we moved here. They just started sending out notifications saying we're starting to rip out the copper and we're replacing it. And so, yeah, I don't know what that means.
I've even seen in some instances where that has taken place that the hotels are instead of the elevator dialing out directly to like the fire department, now they're ringing the front desk. And I'm thinking that's a terrible idea, right? What if they're on break?
I got so distracted with the concepts of this. I missed your question. I'm sorry. What was the original question?
The original question was if you had seen the same trend because I know you deal a lot with IT as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering if you had seen the same trend where you're at, which is in a much more rural area than Ohio.
Yeah, I guess the answer to that is, if anything, I've seen the opposite. Here's what I would tell you, though. Are you familiar with the GrandStream FXO devices?
Yes, I've installed a few.
Oh, okay. Is that do you see that as an option? So somebody has a copper line. They're like, listen, Brandon, not interested in your fancy IP mumbo jumbo. We got copper line, comes right in here. That's great. And you can say, hey, man, we can put this phone right at the front desk. It'll work just like it did before, except when you do decide to take a trip to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, you just take that phone with you, and it's going to tunnel back through the interwebs, and the interwebs will get you back to that copper line.
I haven't gone that far with it, but that's an interesting thought.
I want to segue onto that. The state of West Virginia has told all the phone providers that they are not allowed to run any new copper.
Really?
If there is existing copper and it needs fixed, they can rerun that line and fix it. But everything new. So what we're seeing is, fiber to the building, and then what is it, a PRI?
Yeah.
They drop it off, and then if you've got a copper system in the building, you can take that to copper. But in fact, that's happening at the school system that I work at. The board office already has that. We've had that for a couple of years, but they're running fiber everywhere.
You know what's funny? It seems to me, the knuckle-dragging fool in the conversation, that the only evidence we really need to suggest that this is maybe not as great of an idea as we all think it is, 911 centers are going offline right and left. Look around. Like, there was in fact, I think, Steve, this is in South Dakota. There was a 911 center offline for like a day because somebody cut a fiber line, and guess what? They're all Polycom IP phones.
But if somebody cut a copper line, I mean, they're still down. Obviously, that's easier to repair. I mean, you can run telephone on barbed wire, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I was just doing a quick poke around the internet, and I just happened to notice, so Canada, the UK, Ireland, all have 2025 dates to remove the copper. And I just quickly looked around, and I saw AT&T has applied to remove their copper lines as well by 2025.
They're removing them. Like, they're going to go and cut them out and then put in fiber?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
West Virginia's not gone that far, and I don't know about Ohio.
Certainly not. No, they just disconnect the service.
But, because we're about to upgrade our system in the board office, so I was involved in that, and we were talking about it. And I even suggested, hey, if we've still got these lines, let's throw an IP trunk in there for backup, for failover, because the phone line copper, whether I understand it, the phone system's fiber is not even run to the same data centers as internet fiber. That's the way I was told. And I'm not sure. So, I mean, that gives you 2 points of failure. So if you have the phone coming in on this fiber coming from this place, and your fiber, that goes down, you could have your internet fiber and your trunk going out on your internet, and that would be a failover.
Well, here's my fine point on the discussion. You ready for this? At the end of the day, I was never relying on the U.S. government or ISPs or anybody else to provide me my communication. I have a 50-foot radio tower with a Yagi antenna and a 200-watt radio. And you know what I need for that to work? 12-volt DC, baby, and my voice on the other end. That's it. End of requirements. And as long as I got a radio and you got a radio, I can talk to you, you can talk to me. We'll be just fine.
As long as we can charge our batteries with our bicycles.
Or our Harbor Freight generators.
Or our Harbor Freight generators, till we run out of fuel.
Is there any moving you on that position? This would be a perfect example, by the way. I was just talking about, like, is there any room in your mind for, like, maybe I'm not right about this?
So build cheap crap and let it break. You're basically pitching that.
I'm pitching the concept that's to build cheap stuff so that we can spend our time doing other things.
Like building more cheap stuff because the first stuff broke.
Sure.
No,
Okay.
no, I'm not moving.
All right.
Okay, I've got 1 point on that. I have a set of calipers that were like $20 from Harbor Freight, little digital calipers. I've been using them for years. They always work. Now, are they as accurate as some of the Michitoyos or, those other high-end calipers? No, but it does pretty fair for me doing my 3D printing. I wouldn't spend $170 on the high-end calipers, but I would go spend $20 at Harbor Freight. So I got a tool that I normally wouldn't get. How's that different from getting a Rigol scope or, buying a used piece of equipment that's being cast off? If it gets you in the door with a tool, I mean, you got to think.
Does the caliper still continue to move if the battery or the circuitry is dead?
Yeah, they still move.
Are there individual marks on the caliper that you can still read if the circuitry is dead?
Well, I'm saying I've got.
No,
I've
you
got
gave me a
years-
question.
Yeah, absolutely. They
Okay,
still-
then they're not useless, and you wouldn't throw them out
Mine
just because
does.
the circuitry.
Mine does.
Yours does what?
It has
The marks on it, right? Yeah,
But
and
it
so does
wouldn't measure
mine.
to the
the
thousandth
battery
of
is
an
only
inch.
for the LCD.
Right,
digital,
exactly,
yeah.
and that's kind of my point.
I'm
It's
just saying that not everything, just because it's built to lower quality, it's not completely disposable.
No, but we're
That's not
talking
your
about
objection, though.
No.
Your objection is specifically when it breaks. So I think that really the better example of this is DeLuca's axe. He bought an axe at Harbor Freight. The handle broke. It's made out of plastic. So Steve's point is that axe just goes in the trash. If you built that axe in a slightly different way, you should be able to replace the handle. The fact that we can't, the fact that we won't,
that's the problem, right? So your tool doesn't become non-functional. Okay, maybe you can't do it to the thousandth of a millimeter anymore, but in that case, if you need that level of precision, I would argue you probably are ready to invest in a better tool.
Kenny in the chat room says, here's what I find interesting, or here's what I find Harbor Freight useful for. Is this something I plan on doing time and time again? I don't know, because I've never done it before, and I'm not sure if I'll love it as well. It's cheap to try out at Harbor Freight prices. How do you feel about using disposable, whatever it is, as a form of teaching yourself? So you buy it knowing it's disposable to see if that's something that you'd be willing or able to do.
I mean, I've pretty much walked this walk, though, right? After becoming a homeowner, like never been a homeowner before, I invested in the tools. Even though I didn't know if I was going to do it again, like my hammer drill. I bought it for one specific task, and turns out I use it again, right? And so I spent $100 or $150 or whatever on a DeWalt hammer drill, and turned out that was a good call, right? And if it wasn't, I could give that to somebody and be assured that it would work, or I have it for someone to borrow. And so that it doesn't matter if it's I'm learning. Okay, if you're learning, you could also go get a used tool, and if you can't find a used tool, like then either your tool is esoteric enough, right? Because there's eBay or wherever, like if you were so motivated. And so I just don't find any excuse for stuff that's going to go in the landfill. That's different than cheap stuff, right? Cheap stuff.
Sure.
Right.
Inexpensive stuff is what you're saying.
Yeah, inexpensive stuff, right? Because like you'll have different, for example, mics. The mic may continue to work. It's not $150. It's $30. There's no issue with that. It's I bought a thing and it literally like died as soon as I pulled it out of the socket, and I'm okay with that because I spent $2 on it.
I think maybe the problem might be that, excuse me, Steve was introduced to Harbor Freight by first of all, he'd never heard of them, didn't know what they were. And Harbor Freight has a reputation because 20 years ago, a lot of their tools were garbage. A lot of their tools now are not garbage. Some of them are maybe, their tolerances aren't as good as, but I mean,
You just told me 24 hours ago you bought an axe and it broke.
No, I told you 24 hours ago, I bought a sledgehammer, and I hit the handle on a piece of rebar that I was trying to drive into the ground. I broke the handle.
Okay.
What the thing with Harbor Freight was, it was an inexpensive tool that I needed, and had I not broke the plastic handle, I mean, it was plastic molded, it should have lasted for years.
It doesn't matter what the name brand is,
It
right?
doesn't,
We could have been arguing about Kleenex versus facial tissue, but the stance of mine wouldn't change, right? Okay, you can say, well, Harbor Freight has changed, fine, but this was never about Harbor Freight. It was about a retailer that sells things that everybody knows has a limited shelf life.
Well,
right? So like you can argue about Harbor Freight, and that's great that they are legitimately great that they're expanding their quality.
I wouldn't say they have a limited shelf life, because like I said, 20 years ago I bought
But that's
an
his
air
argument, though.
compressor.
If you take the limited shelf life thing away, he doesn't have an objection
So
to it
this
anymore.
is
Purely
Steve's
about
Matrix argument in reverse with you. He doesn't want to get on Matrix, and you're using Matrix for everything, so he's going to stand. I don't know.
I don't see the
I'm
parallel.
not following.
But what you're saying is he doesn't want stuff to wind up in the trash. That's,
Yeah, like there's no reason for that.
But you could argue that you go and buy the best tool in the world, and you could get a lemon, and is it going to end up in the trash? Yes.
Sure, and I could go out and buy rotten fruit off the grocery store shelf, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to take that as my cardinal rule when I'm shopping. I could go to the place that sells day-old stuff, and there's a higher likelihood that I'm going to get something that's crusty or rotting or whatever. Or I could go to a regular grocery store where they generally have a reputation for having stuff that has a decent shelf life. Could I get something that goes rotten? Yes. Does that mean I should not shop there anymore? No.
Well, I could get a tool that's going to fail me. Does that mean I shouldn't shop there anymore? No.
No, but my point is like you just said, well, I could spend more money and get a lemon. Sure, you could. Absolutely. But there's a difference between making a choice where you know you're buying something cheap that is probably going to disintegrate.
But that's what I prefaced this it with. They don't. I don't go to Harbor Freight
But
now.
then
and
Stop
we-
pick up-
defending the brand name. This is not the brand name argument. Right?
Okay, but I go into this store, and the tools are less expensive. I don't consider a lot of what I get there anymore cheap.
Okay.
I mean-
Again, this is not about Harbor Freight. I've never been. I have no dog in that fight. I'm making the argument that, like, if people are intentionally patronizing things that they know are one use or very limited use, that should go away. That's my argument. So if Harbor Freight's
Okay.
picking up the quality,
Okay.
great.
Okay, I can see that. I can agree with that.
Mr. McBride in the chat room says, "Welcome to the Bash Steve Show." You don't feel like you're being bashed, do you?
Not at all.
Okay. So you like defending your views.
People ask it, and if they actually want to know, then I'll answer the question.
If they want to know what is true, I will tell them. If they don't want to know what is true, they can continue to live in denial.
Well, in this case, I'm telling you my truth.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Does anybody else have questions? Ask me anything. Give me anything in the chat room. Geeklab.ninja in the Geek Lab, or anybody that is around here at Self. You're welcome to grab the microphone. You're welcome to ask us questions. We'll take them on anything. Can be on tech, but it doesn't have to be.
I got one more question.
Okay.
I've been struggling with an intermittent problem with Samba that occasionally, I'll get a user that can't connect or can't get the properties, the privileges to access files that they recently wrote. It's so infrequent, but the only way to restore it is to restart Samba. And I've tried troubleshooting this for several hours with lots of different help. And my real question is, how do you find subject matter experts for open source software? And because I've also got things that I'd like to have some stuff built in Cockpit, and I'd like to have somebody who already knows that, because I could spend my time learning it, or I could pay somebody who knows. And sometimes it's easier for me to pay an expert than it is for me to become an expert.
So you're kind of answering your own question. So you're right. It is absolutely cheaper to pay somebody who is already doing it than it is to try to pay somebody to try to learn how to do it 100% of the time. My advice to you there is go find the people that are doing that work, and then go and have them do your thing. Now your next question is going to be, so where are those people? Well, if you go, so for like example in Cockpit, right? Where are the Cockpit modules? What are the Cockpit modules that have been written? Oftentimes what you'll find is it often isn't, sometimes it's a company, but oftentimes it will be an individual. And I've seen this, not so much with Cockpit, but in other projects, where there's a person, and this person, he or she, will become very prolific for writing this particular thing or working on this very thing, and then companies will hire this person. They kind of bounce around. But if you look at where the momentum of that particular project or that particular thing is, it's happening. So I would tell you, go find a Cockpit module that exists, see who wrote those, a well-done Cockpit module that you like, reach out to them.
Well, and I already did that, and they were so busy writing other Cockpit modules they didn't have time and couldn't make a recommendation to me of who else could fill that role. So maybe we throw this out to the audience that, hey, if somebody knows somebody who writes Cockpit modules and wants to be known for doing that, I'd be interested in having a conversation.
Absolutely. Music and Ears means we're out of time. We're back on Tuesday. AskNoahShow.com.